You know, usually when we talk about a company's financial health, there's this expectation of like absolute precision.
Oh, yeah. Like a hard science.
Exactly. It's almost like looking at a medical x-ray. You look at the balance sheet, the revenue, the profit margins, the debt to equity ratio.
Right.
The numbers are either black or white. The jagged white line of a broken bone is right there on the film, and the accountant or the auditor just points at it and says, you know, there it is. That's your problem.
Yeah, it's mathematically verifiable. I mean, if the numbers don't add up, the system flags it immediately.
Yeah.
There's really very little room for interpretation when you're looking at hard financial data.
Broken or not broken, profitable or not profitable. It's clean, and honestly, it's comforting.
It is.
We like things to be visible, to be categorized, especially when, billions of dollars are on the line. But then, for the last decade or so, you step into the world of corporate sustainability and climate strategy, and suddenly that financial x-ray machine seems completely broken.
Oh, completely.
We've been looking at a landscape that is, well, honestly, it's murky.
It has been the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Hmm.
For a long time, we were dealing with a space filled with promises, colorful brochures, and frankly, very little standardized math.
Yeah.
You had companies making these grand net zero pledges for the year 2050 without a single line item in their current budget, reflecting how they actually plan to get there. It was all narrative.
Right, all narrative. But if you've been paying attention to corporate news lately, you've probably heard a lot of noise about this changing. You've heard the buzzwords. But today, for you, the listener, we are looking at how this entire narrative is completely flipping.
And a massive pivot.
The X-ray machine has been fixed, but it's no longer just scanning for debt, it's scanning for carbon. And to understand how this is happening, we are unpacking a really fascinating, highly strategic set of materials today. We've got our hands on a draft of a LinkedIn post aimed squarely at corporate leaders, paired with a painstakingly detailed 1,000-word design prompt for its accompanying visual thumbnail.
What's fascinating here is that together, these two pieces of text tell a story that is incredibly urgent for anyone interacting with the modern economy. They basically map out a fundamental rewiring of how global business evaluates risk.
Okay, let's unpack this. The mission of our deep dive today is to explore a radical shift happening right now in corporate finance. We are going to explore how carbon strategy is no longer just a feel-good PR narrative.
Right.
It has become a hard, cold, mathematical input for chief financial officers who are determining the actual cost of capital. We'll look at the financial logic of this shift and later the absolutely fascinating psychological visual cues used to communicate this to executives.
The visual stuff is wild.
It really is.
Yeah.
But to understand where we are going, we really need to understand the physical real estate of these conversations. Like, where did climate strategy used to live and where has it relocated?
And that relocation is really the crux of the entire issue. We are looking at a very stark reality here. The market is no longer pricing only your revenue. It is pricing your exposure to carbon. Let's think about where this used to sit. For a long time, climate strategy lived in sustainability decks.
Right, the PR stuff.
Exactly. These were essentially marketing documents. They were narrative-driven, often backward-looking, focusing on all the good deeds a company did last year to make themselves look responsible to the public and to their employees.
I picture a glossy PDF filled with pictures of employees planting trees,
Yes, lots of trees.
maybe some solar panels on a warehouse roof, and a whole lot of the color green. It was the kind of document you handed out at a career fair or linked in the footer of a corporate website.
Yeah. And who owned that document?
Mm-hmm.
The marketing department. Or the corporate communications team.
Right.
Maybe a chief sustainability officer whose primary job was really just stakeholder engagement. But the massive shift we're analyzing today is that this strategy has physically relocated within the corporate structure. It no longer sits in the marketing department's sustainability deck. It now sits inside credit models.
Wait, hold on. Let me just pause there because that sounds like a subtle semantic shift, but it feels massive. Are we saying we've taken the colorful, glossy brochure from the marketing department and literally handed it over to the actuary with a grayscale spreadsheet?
That is the exact mechanical shift taking place.
Okay.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a credit model is the absolute antithesis of a marketing deck.
Oh, yeah.
A credit model is forward-looking. It is deeply mathematical. Its entire purpose is to assess risk, calculate the probability of default, and ensure predictability for lenders.
It's about the money.
Entirely about the money. When a concept moves from marketing to underwriting, it fundamentally changes its nature. It suddenly dictates whether a company can afford to borrow the money it needs to survive and operate.
I want to push back on this a little bit, though, because when I read the news, all I see is talk about regulators. The SEC in the United States, the European regulators. It feels like companies are only doing this because governments are forcing them to. Isn't this just a giant compliance exercise?
That is a very common assumption, but the reality is much, much colder. This is not compliance pressure. This is capital allocation logic.
Okay, what is the practical difference for a CFO sitting at their desk? Like, what does that actually mean?
Compliance pressure means you are doing something because a regulator or a government agency told you that you have to. You fill out the forms to avoid a fine.
Right. Check the box.
Exactly. And if the political winds change and the regulator goes away, well, you stop filling out the forms.
Yeah.
But capital allocation logic, that means the foundational math of how money is loaned, invested, and priced has fundamentally changed. The shift isn't happening just because of new laws. It's happening because the people who hold the money, the banks, the private equity firms, the bond markets, they've realized that carbon exposure equals financial risk.
Oh, wow.
Even if a regulator completely looks the other way, the bank isn't going to. The bank wants its money back in 10 years.
That is a massive paradigm shift. You're saying the free market has essentially outpaced the regulators. The market is looking down the barrel of the next 20 years and realizing, wait, if we loan money to a company whose entire business model relies on cheap, unregulated carbon emissions, and the world suddenly decides to tax or ban those emissions?
Our loan goes into default.
Exactly.
Precisely. The lenders are acting out of self-preservation. It is a completely ruthless math-driven calculation. And I want to be clear, we are just looking at the mechanics of the market here, not taking a stance on the politics of carbon pricing.
Right. We're just reporting on what the source material is outlining about the financial reality.
Exactly.
Which means we need to get into the mechanics of this.
Yeah.
Because if the math has changed, I want to know exactly how it's hitting the spreadsheets. We've got 4 specific ways that CFOs, the people actually holding the purse strings in these organizations, are experiencing this reality check.
Let's do it.
Let's look at the first one. Lenders are adjusting risk premiums based on emissions intensity.
Let's break down the mechanics of a risk premium. When a company goes to a bank for a loan, let's say they need, $500 million to build a new manufacturing facility. The bank doesn't just hand over the cash at a flat rate.
Obviously not.
They calculate an interest rate based on how likely they think it is that the company might fail to pay them back. A risk premium is the extra interest you have to pay because you were deemed a riskier bet.
Like a bad credit score for a person trying to buy a car. The lower your score, the higher your interest rate.
Exactly like that. Now, introduce emissions intensity into that equation. Emissions intensity is essentially a ratio. It asks, how much carbon do you pump into the atmosphere for every dollar of revenue you generate?
Okay.
If you have a high emissions intensity, lenders are looking at that and seeing massive future liabilities. They see potential future carbon taxes. They see the eventual unavoidable cost of having to overhaul your equipment down the line.
Right, because old tech becomes a liability.
Yes. They see the risk of your product becoming obsolete in a low-carbon economy.
So if I'm a heavily polluting manufacturer, the bank isn't necessarily saying, we won't lend to you because we are environmentalists. They're saying, we will lend to you, but because your carbon footprint makes your future cash flow highly vulnerable, we are going to charge you 8% interest instead of 5%.
Yes, and that 3% difference on a $500 million loan is millions of dollars a year in extra costs.
Billions.
Your money just got significantly more expensive. It eats directly into your profit margins, which lowers your stock price, which makes your shareholders angry. It is a direct, immediate financial penalty.
Wow. Okay, let's move to the second mechanism, which feels even more immediate. Insurers are repricing exposure tied to climate volatility. We always talk about insurance as this boring background detail, but it really is the invisible scaffolding of the entire economy, isn't it?
Insurance is the absolute backbone of global commerce. If you can't insure a facility, you can't build it. If you can't insure a cargo ship, it doesn't leave the port. And importantly, you cannot get a bank to fund a project if you cannot prove to the bank that the project is insured. The two are inextricably linked.
So how are insurers looking at climate volatility differently now than they did, say, 10 years ago?
Well, 10 years ago, insurance was largely based on historical actuarial tables. They looked at the past 100 years of weather data to predict the next year.
Makes sense.
But historical data is no longer a reliable predictor of future weather events. Insurers are now looking at two kinds of risk: First is physical risk. Floods, wildfires, extreme weather events that can literally destroy a factory.
The tangible stuff.
Right. If you build a logistics hub in a coastal area prone to storm surges, the insurer will either hike your premiums astronomically or simply refuse to cover you.
And the second type of risk?
Transition risk. This is the risk associated with the global transition away from fossil fuels. If your entire business model is heavily reliant on a stable, predictable climate, and that climate is volatile, the insurer is going to reprice your policy. If you are operating a fleet of diesel trucks and regulations are clearly shifting toward electric vehicles, insurers see that fleet as a liability. They hike your premiums.
So if I'm a CFO and my insurer is suddenly demanding massive premium hikes because of my climate volatility, my environmental positioning is literally being translated into immediate financial risk. Like right this second. It's a line item on this quarter's balance sheet.
Exactly. It is no longer a hypothetical problem for the year 2050. It is draining your cash reserves today. And it's only going to get worse as weather events become more frequent and severe.
That is terrifying from an operational standpoint. And speaking of operations, let's look at the third way this is hitting CFOs. Expert markets are filtering suppliers through disclosure standards. This one is fascinating because it's not just about the cost of money. It's about who is even allowed to play the game.
This is a massive geopolitical shift. We are seeing major economic blocs establish rules that basically act as a toll booth.
A toll booth, I like that.
The European Union, for example, has the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. It essentially says, if you want to sell your goods in our massive, lucrative market, you have to prove your carbon footprint meets our standards. And if it doesn't, we are going to slap a massive tariff on your goods at the border to level the playing field with our domestic companies.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. Let's invent a hypothetical company. Let's say I'm a steel manufacturer in India or a fertilizer producer in the United States. For decades, I've just been shipping my product to Germany, no questions asked, as long as the quality was good and the price was right.
Right.
But now you're saying I get to the virtual border and they ask for my carbon disclosure. And if I don't have one, or if my numbers are terrible, what happens?
If you don't have the data, you might be blocked entirely.
Just completely shut out.
Yes. Or if you have the data but your emissions are too high, your product is hit with a tariff that makes it completely uncompetitive compared to European steel or fertilizer. Suddenly, a supplier sitting in one country might find themselves locked out of a massive international market. Not because their product's physical quality dropped, but because they couldn't clear the disclosure hurdle.
It's an invisible border wall built entirely out of accounting standards, and if you can't clear the wall, your revenue drops to zero in that region overnight.
And that loss of market access is something credit rating agencies watch very, very closely, which sets up the fourth and final consequence perfectly. Supply chains are breaking, where transition plans are absent.
This is the one that feels like a contagion. Let's dig deep into this. How does someone else's carbon problem become my financial problem?
It's all about Scope 3 emissions.
Scope 3, right?
Yeah, in carbon accounting, Scope 1 is the fuel you burn directly, like the gas in your company cars. Scope 2 is the electricity you buy to keep the lights on. But Scope 3, that is everything else. It is the entire carbon footprint of your supply chain, both upstream and downstream.
So if I'm a massive global brand, let's say I make smartphones, my Scope 3 includes the carbon emitted by the mining company extracting lithium in South America, the factory assembling the screens in Asia, and the shipping company moving the boxes across the Pacific.
Exactly. Now imagine you are the CEO of that smartphone company, and you have publicly promised your shareholders and your lenders that you are going to cut your carbon emissions in half by 2030 to secure better interest rates.
Okay, my neck is on the line.
Right. The only way you can mathematically achieve that is by forcing your entire supply chain to cut their emissions.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So, you turn to a mid-level vendor, let's say a company that has been supplying specialized screws for your phones for 20 years. You ask them for their carbon transition plan. You need to know how they're going to help you hit your goals. And they hand you a glossy PDF with a picture of a tree on it. Or worse, they say, we don't have one. We're too small to worry about that.
What does a smartphone giant do? Do they help them figure it out?
The global brand just drops them. The supply chain literally breaks.
Just like that?
Just like that. The buyer's own financial risk, their own promises to their lenders' mandates, that they sever ties with any vendor who cannot provide a mathematically sound transition plan. The buyer cannot afford to absorb the vendor's carbon liability.
So that vendor doesn't just face expensive loans or higher insurance premiums, they literally lose their biggest client overnight.
Yes, the contagion effect is real. The financial pressure starts at the top with the massive asset managers and banks, and it rolls downhill, crushing any weak link in the supply chain.
Okay, so let's summarize the nightmare scenario for a CFO right now. Your loans are getting more expensive, your insurance is skyrocketing, you are getting blocked from selling overseas, and your biggest domestic buyers are threatening to drop you.
It's a lot.
It's a disaster. The obvious solution is to create a plan, right? Just write something down, hire a consultant, put together a document, and make the problem go away. But the materials we are analyzing today draw a massive, unyielding distinction between a weak plan and a credible one.
And this is where the survival of a modern corporation is actually decided. It's not about having a document. It's about what that document can withstand. The text states that a weak or absent transition plan does three specific things quietly. I want to emphasize that word, quietly.
What's fascinating here is the implication of that word. A weak plan doesn't trigger an alarm. There's no klaxon going off in the CFO's office. Nobody comes in and arrests you.
No. It's an insidious process. It just slowly bleeds the company. A weak plan quietly raises perceived long-term risk, it reduces lender confidence in cash flow durability, and it signals operational fragility under policy shifts.
Operational fragility. That is a chilling phrase in corporate finance.
It really is.
It basically means if the wind changes direction, your company might snap in half.
Let's look at what operational fragility actually means. Suppose a new carbon tax is introduced. A robust company has already modeled this, optimized its energy use, and knows exactly how much margin it will lose.
Right.
An operationally fragile company panics, has no idea how to track its emissions, gets hit with a massive unexpected tax bill, and suddenly has to halt production because it can't afford to run its own machines.
And lenders can smell that fragility from a mile away. So the result of those three quiet failures is very simple. A higher cost of capital, you pay more just to exist. Now contrast that with what a credible transition plan does. It does the exact opposite. First, it converts regulatory uncertainty into modeled scenarios.
Right. It takes the unknown and makes it a math problem.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Look, business is hard. Margins are tight. Wait, isn't any transition plan better than no plan? I mean, if I write down a 50-page document with a beautiful green cover that says we're trying our absolute best to be sustainable by 2040 and we're going to switch to LED light bulbs in the office, shouldn't lenders appreciate the effort? Isn't the intent worth something?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of underwriting, intent is utterly worthless.
Ouch.
Lenders do not care about your moral compass. They do not care if you want to save the world. They care if you can mathematically prove you can survive the worst-case scenarios and still pay back the principal and interest on their loan. That's why a credible plan is entirely focused on what underwriters call downside containment.
Downside containment, meaning when things go horribly wrong, when the supply chain shocks hit, when the carbon taxes arrive, here is the absolute floor of how much money we will lose, and here's exactly how we will still generate enough cash to pay you, the bank.
Precisely. It shows operational control, not just a panicked reaction to bad news. That predictability is what changes how capital is priced. You aren't getting a cheaper loan because you look responsible. You are getting a cheaper loan because you look predictable.
And there is this brutal, brilliant rule about this concept that just blew my mind. The text says, if your transition plan cannot survive a credit committee discussion, it is not a plan, it is a document.
That might be the most powerful sentence we are looking at today. We need to visualize what a credit committee actually is.
Oh, please do.
It is a room full of highly skeptical, deeply cynical, risk-averse financial professionals. Their entire job is to poke holes in a company's ability to generate cash. They look for the flaw in the armor.
I'm picturing a massive mahogany table, cold lighting, a bunch of executives who have seen every trick in the book.
Exactly. And if you slide a glossy 50-page sustainability deck across the table to the chief risk officer, they will tear it apart in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
They will ask, where is the capital expenditure allocated for this equipment upgrade? How does this Scope 3 reduction goal align with your projected revenue growth in Asia? What is your hedge against a $100 per ton carbon price?
Wow.
If your answers aren't backed by hard data tied directly to the balance sheet, the committee pushes the glossy PDF back across the table. It's just a document. It's paper. It is not a plan.
It's just a wish list disguised as corporate strategy. And this harsh reality of what actually passes a credit committee reveals a massive, dangerous gap in how different parts of the corporate world are viewing the exact same issue. Which brings us to a bombshell statement. Honestly, this completely upended how I view the whole green economy. The text states, climate finance is not scarce. Credible recipients are.
We really need to pause on that and unpack the mechanics of it. Climate finance is not scarce. There is a very persistent narrative out there. You hear it in the news, you hear it from politicians, that the transition to a lower carbon economy is stalling because there just isn't enough money to fund it. We need more government subsidies. We need more grants. This material completely inverts that narrative.
The money is already sitting there. Trillions of dollars of institutional capital, private equity funds, sovereign wealth funds, green bond markets are waiting to be deployed. They have mandates to invest in the transition. But the companies are failing the test. They are failing to prove they are safe bets.
Because of that gap we just mentioned, there is a fundamental disconnect at the highest levels of corporate governance. The text points this out perfectly. Boards still treat carbon strategy as narrative. Markets treat it as underwriting input.
Let's dive into that valuation gap. The board of directors, the people steering the ship, hiring the CEO, approving the long-term vision, they are still acting like it's 2018.
Yeah, completely.
They are treating carbon strategy as a PR exercise. They want a good story to tell the shareholders at the annual meeting. Look at our new recycling initiative. But the market, the people actually buying the stock and lending the billions of dollars, are running the company's data through their algorithms as a hard underwriting input.
Think about the danger of that disconnect. The board thinks they're doing a great job because their latest sustainability report won an award for its graphic design.
Right.
Meanwhile, the credit rating agencies are quietly downgrading their debt because they don't have a mathematically sound roadmap for replacing their fossil fuel-dependent machinery.
So the board is completely blind to the fact that the ground is shifting beneath them. And what is the ultimate result of that blindness?
The conclusion is stark. That gap is where valuation gets decided. If a board fundamentally misunderstands how the market is judging their future viability, the company's valuation is going to plummet. Not necessarily because the core product is bad. I mean, they might make the best widgets in the world. But their valuation drops because they are perceived by the market as fundamentally mismanaging a massive, systemic, entirely predictable risk.
So what does this all mean for the listener? Let's bring this down to the ground level. If you are evaluating a company, maybe you're an analyst thinking about recommending their stock, maybe you're interviewing for a senior leadership job there, or maybe your business is considering a massive 10-year partnership with them, you need to look completely past their marketing. You need to look at whether their board is talking in narratives or if their CFO is talking in numbers.
Exactly.
Do they have a transition plan or do they just have a document? If they are stuck in the narrative phase, their cost of capital is about to go up, their margins are about to shrink, and their valuation is about to take a hit.
It is a massive leading indicator of future financial distress. If they can't manage this risk, what other long-term risks are they ignoring?
Exactly. Now, here is where this deep dive gets really interesting. The author of this text didn't just write these words. They understood that to get this heavy, highly technical message across to corporate leaders who are endlessly scrolling through LinkedIn, they needed a visual that would subconsciously stop them in their tracks.
It's brilliant.
They engineered an incredibly specific 1,000-word design prompt for the thumbnail image meant to accompany this post. And this is where we move from exploring financial engineering to exploring psychological engineering.
The visual prompt is honestly just as revealing as the text itself. It is a masterclass in how to visually communicate abstract financial risk. It demands a Dieter Rams-aligned, high-fidelity visual system.
Let's explain that reference for a second for anyone who isn't a massive design nerd. Dieter Rams is an iconic industrial designer, most famous for his work at Braun in the mid-20th century.
Like the calculators, the radios.
Exactly. He influenced everything from those classic calculators to the original Apple iPhone. His philosophy is famously summarized as less but better. Strict reduction. Good design is as little design as possible. You strip away everything that isn't absolutely essential to the function.
And the prompt explicitly applies this ruthless reduction to communicating corporate dread. It demands strict reduction principles, no decorative elements, no visual noise. Every single element in the frame must justify its presence. Think about what this achieves. By applying this severe minimalism, the prompt completely strips away all the fluffy, colorful, green leaf aesthetics we usually associate with sustainability communications.
Right. There are no hands holding glowing globes. There are no windmills in the sunset. The instructions for the subject of the image are meticulously exact. Listen to this. Primary subject. A single human figure, mid-40s, gender-neutral appearance, dressed in a simple, well-fitted dark suit. No branding, neutral expression. The person is seated at a clean desk, facing slightly to the right, looking at a document or screen that is not fully visible to the viewer.
It's deliberately stripping away any specific identity so that the figure becomes a universal archetype. It's not a specific man or woman, it's the role of the CFO itself. By making them gender neutral and giving them a neutral expression, the viewer can't dismiss them as someone else.
And the posture, the prompt dictates. The posture is upright but slightly tense, hands resting on the table, one hand lightly gripping a pen. The body language should communicate evaluation, not emotion. It's like directing a psychological corporate thriller. The monster isn't a climate disaster outside the window. The monster is a fluctuating interest rate hiding inside a closed laptop. The tension is all in the grip of the pen.
That's a brilliant way to look at it. The tension is entirely internal. It forces any executive looking at the image to project their own financial anxieties, their own impending credit committee meetings onto that subject. It acts as a mirror. And notice how isolated the figure is. There are only 3 objects allowed on the desk: a thin laptop, a single sheet of paper with faint grav lines, and a pen.
No clutter, no background objects. It's isolating the viewer with the anxiety of the evaluation. There's nowhere for the eye to escape. But the physical subjects are just one part of this prompt. The true genius of the visual strategy lies in the environment, the lighting, and the hidden data. Let's look closer at the psychology of restraint the prompt outlines.
The environment is specified as a minimal office space, no identifiable location. The background is a flat, matte surface in soft gray or off-white. Again, stripping away any context that could distract from the core message of risk.
But the lighting, this is where the psychological manipulation really takes hold. The instructions read, controlled directional light from the left side at a 45-degree angle, soft shadows, no harsh highlights. But here is the key constraint the prompt gives the designer. The subject is well lit, but the right side of the frame falls slightly into shadow, suggesting uncertainty or risk without visual exaggeration.
And they explicitly follow that up by saying, avoid cinematic lighting. This is not a movie poster. It is controlled, functional illumination. This is crucial. If the lighting is too dramatic, it feels fake. It feels like a Hollywood interpretation of a boardroom. It feels like marketing. By keeping it functional but allowing that shadow of uncertainty to creep in on the right side, it whispers to the viewer's subconscious. It says, this is a cold, hard, mundane reality.
Then there's the color palette. It is fiercely restricted. Primary colors are neutral grays. They even give the exact hex codes in the prompt, hashtag D9D9D9, hashtag BFBFBF. Accents are muted deep green or desaturated blue, and the text is pure black.
What's fascinating here is what is purposefully missing from that color palette.
Red. There's absolutely no red allowed anywhere in the image.
Yes. The prompt specifically states, no urgency cues like red colors, alarms, or exaggerated expressions. Why would you avoid red when you're trying to communicate risk? Because red triggers immediate, short-term panic, a fire alarm. It feels like an emergency that someone else needs to fix right now, and then the danger will pass. By explicitly avoiding red, alarms, and glossy surfaces, the image is communicating something much more chilling. It's saying, this is serious. This is a permanent structural shift. This is already happening. This is being evaluated, not announced.
It's the difference between a fire alarm going off in the hallway and a doctor quietly closing the door before handing you your test results. The tension comes entirely from the restraint.
And then we have the typography and the message integration itself. There's only one line of text allowed, placed carefully in that shadowed negative space on the right side of the frame. Carbon, now prices capital.
Pure black text, sans serif, geometric font like Helvetica Neue, medium weight, not bold. The prompt insists, no subtext, no logos, no hashtags. It's presented not as a catchy marketing slogan, but as an undeniable physical law of the universe. Gravity exists, the sun rises in the east, and carbon now prices capital.
And the final piece of the visual composition is the symbolism. On that single sheet of paper on the desk, there's a faint line graph. The instructions are incredibly precise. A downward curve transitioning into volatility. A slight overlay of a thin secondary line in muted green or blue. Do not label axes, do not include numbers.
The graph is a hint, not an explanation.
It introduces the concept of financial instability directly into the CFO's eye line without cluttering the Dieter Rams aesthetic. It's the visual equivalent of that quiet risk we talked about earlier. It's not a giant red arrow plunging downward. It's just a subtle downward line trailing off into unpredictable volatility. It forces the executive to lean in and realize the math is failing.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The prompt ends with a section labeled Final Constraint. It says, if any element can be removed without breaking the message, remove it. The final image should feel inevitable, not designed. The viewer should not notice the design. They should only register the idea.
If we connect this visual philosophy back to everything we just discussed about the credible transition plan, the parallels are striking. The prompt demands an image stripped of all noise, all decoration, and all PR fluff to convey cold, hard evaluation.
Yes, because that is exactly what a credit committee does to a transition plan.
Exactly. Just as the visual must be reduced to its absolute most essential elements to communicate financial dread, a transition plan must be stripped of all its narrative storytelling to survive a credit committee discussion. Both require strict, unforgiving logic. Both reject emotion in favor of predictability and downside containment.
The fluff gets you ignored by the LinkedIn viewer, and the fluff gets you rejected by the institutional lender. It is the exact same mechanism operating in two completely different domains. The medium and the message are completely unified here.
It is a masterclass in strategic communication.
Yeah.
The author knows that to convince a board or a CFO that the math has changed, you can't use the visual language of the old marketing decks. You can't use leaves and sunshine. You have to use the visual language of risk management. You have to speak their native tongue, which is the language of spreadsheets, shadows, and subtle volatility.
Okay, let's take a breath and synthesize the journey we've just been on. We started by looking at the death of the glossy sustainability deck. We watched climate strategy get packed up, taken out of the marketing department, and moved down the hall into the ruthless mathematical world of the credit model.
We explored the real-world pain points, the four mechanical ways CFOs are feeling this shift in their cash flows right now. Lenders adjusting risk premiums based on emissions intensity, insurers repricing exposure due to climate volatility, export markets building invisible walls through disclosure standards, and the contagion of breaking supply chains from massive global buyers enforcing Scope 3 mandates.
We looked at the terrifyingly quiet way a weak transition plan slowly bleeds a company's valuation, and how the only defense is a credible plan built on downside containment that can survive the sheer skepticism of a credit committee. We saw the massive gap where boards are still telling stories while the markets are underwriting risk, and how trillions in capital are sitting on the sidelines waiting for companies to prove they aren't fragile.
And finally, we dissected how to visually communicate this entire paradigm shift, using minimalist, tension-filled design that forces the viewer to confront this new reality of capital allocation without relying on cheap urgency cues.
For you listening right now, whether you are a learner peeking into the high-stakes world of corporate finance for the first time, or you're preparing for a massive strategic meeting tomorrow, or you're just trying to understand the invisible forces shaping the modern economy, the takeaway is crystal clear. The language of environmentalism has been entirely, permanently translated into the language of financial risk.
The transition is no longer just a narrative. It is a structural economic reality. If you aren't measuring it, you can't price it. And if you can't price it, the market will price it for you, and I guarantee you will not like their math.
Which brings us back to that X-ray machine we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive. The machine isn't broken, it's just scanning for a new kind of fracture. The companies that realize this, the ones that build credible plans and face the math head-on, are going to survive the diagnosis. The ones that don't are going to be in for a very painful shock when they try to ask the bank for a lifeline. So, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today, building on the profound question our source text asked at the very end. If the cost of capital is now inexorably tied to carbon and the boardroom is still lagging years behind the market, look at the organizations around you. Look at the companies you buy from, the company you work for, or the stocks you invest in. When carbon finally hits their borrowing costs, and what is the very first thing that will break? Is it their supply chain? Is it their valuation? Or is it simply their illusion of being prepared?
It's a question every leader needs to answer before the market answers it for them.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, look for the math, and we will see you next time.